This is a Cannabis Coast to Coast News one-on-one special report. I'm Joe Parsons from the Virginia Cannabis Connection. Today, joining me on the couch is Morgan Fox. Morgan Fox is the Director of Government Relations for NORML. Hello, Morgan. It's an honor to have you on with me today, sir.
Hey, Joe. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Outstanding. Now, I'm going to be in Richmond this weekend covering the Virginia NORML's Lobby Days. You, of course, are going to be the keynote speaker at the Virginia NORML Lobby Days this coming weekend on January 25th and 26th. So why exactly are these lobby days so important?
Well, I think primarily the Virginia Cannabis Conference is important in terms of activating and educating local advocates in order to better represent the interests of cannabis consumers in the state of Virginia, but also give them a little bit of information about what's going on at a national level. And that's primarily what my keynote is going to focus on, sort of where we've been, where we are potentially going, and how we can best leverage the position that we're in currently in order to affect cannabis policy reform at the local, state, and federal level. I know those are kind of broad strokes, but I want to leave a little bit of something for the attendees. Uh,
Sure.
but I think that honestly, that's the really biggest question on everybody's mind in this space is, where do we go from here? And we're seeing that there's considerably more pushback in some of the states that have yet to legalize cannabis or have yet to regulate sales. In Virginia, there's definitely a lot of opposition to actually regulating sales, despite the fact that the people and majority of lawmakers supported making cannabis legal for adults. And so that's definitely something that our folks are going to be working on when they're doing lobbying, but something that is going to be a top line conversation when we're talking with advocates at the actual conference.
Most definitely. It has definitely been a battle here. Governor Youngkin has fought it tooth and nail, and we don't really expect his viewpoint to change. He specifically talked about that at the State of the Commonwealth address that he's pretty much going to stick to what he said during his veto message, that he feels that it's just too much harm towards the kids, and the stigma has just been ever going. So
Yeah, I mean, that's a completely ridiculous position to take, given that regulation better helps protect youth and consumers. It helps discourage youth use and helps keep consumers safe. And trying to prevent the regulation of a legal cannabis market does a disservice to both of those populations. So hopefully over the next year or so, somebody will be able to, like knock some sense into Youngkin when it comes to this particular issue, metaphorically, of course. But if not, I do think that there are some things that we can do in the Virginia legislature that would also benefit cannabis consumers, specifically looking out for cannabis consumers' rights when it comes to Fourth Amendment and search and seizure, as well as parental rights.
most definitely.
This is something that actually Governor Youngkin has vetoed in the past, but hopefully we can get to a veto-proof majority. Um, and at the very least, I think that it would be good for the state to pass a study bill that which I believe is HB 2366 and SB 1442, which would really take a look at what the unregulated cannabis market looks like in Virginia and what the best ways would be to protect consumers. Obviously, we need regulation in order to do that. That's a fait accompli. But getting a little bit more detail in there, while the governor is maintaining a steadfast opposition to any sort of regulated sales, I think would be a step in the right direction.
Yes, sir. Senator Rouse has been doing a marvelous job here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of work that can be done, and I think that sort of the incrementalism that is going to be necessary in order to make progress in the Virginia legislature this year is, I think, almost a mirror of the sort of incrementalism that we're looking at having to deal with in Congress, where, honestly, it's going to be very unlikely that we pass any sort of comprehensive descheduling legislation, especially not legislation that works to repair the harms caused by cannabis prohibition. But we do have an opportunity to pass incremental legislation, whether that be banking or things that are much more consumer oriented, such as housing protection, employment protection. The list goes on. And so I encourage everybody to be on the lookout for legislation like that coming up in the 119th Congress, but also for folks in Virginia to really put as much of their effort as possible into bills that actually stand a really strong chance of passing. In particular, the parental rights bills and some of the clarification language for the medical program.
Most definitely. Now with a new administration coming into Washington D.C., what are you going to be doing to make federal reform a priority?
Well, I mean, that's really the big question, and I think that traditionally, support for cannabis policy reform, whether it be among the general voting populace or in members of Congress, is a mile wide but an inch deep. And so it's very rarely a priority issue. And that's something that we're definitely working on changing in several different ways. One is encouraging additional membership in the Congressional Cannabis Caucus. Another is just really focusing on individual champions who have introduced legislation to get them to reintroduce legislation that we've supported in the past, hopefully with more co-sponsors than last time, which in some cases were actually quite a few. But in others, there was a little bit of a delay in getting additional co-sponsors for various political reasons, which I'm hoping that we can overcome and move past in the upcoming Congress. There's also going to be a really big focus on executive actions. Now, the power of the executive is relatively limited when it comes to cannabis policy reform, but the MO for the coming Congress, I think, is pretty clearly going to be prioritization is based from the White House. And so we need to concentrate on making sure that President Trump sees this as a priority issue and then directs the GOP in Congress to prioritize that issue as well. Again, I think that we're probably not in a position to be able to get widespread, comprehensive reform. But I think that we do have a lot of opportunities to get some more incremental reforms across the finish line this year, provided that we can actually get administrative support for them moving through Congress, which will help us ease some of the barriers that we have, particularly among unfriendly committee heads, folks like Jim Jordan in the House Judiciary Committee. Is just one example.
Yes, sir. What are your thoughts when this past week when Judge John J. Mulrooney postponed the final set of hearings that would have potentially moved cannabis off of Schedule 1, and he specifically called out Ann Milgram, the head of the DEA. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we have been involved with, we as a NORML have been involved with the various, rescheduling petitions for almost 50 years now. There have been multiple attempts. And so we've been saying since this process started that it probably wasn't going to happen quickly. Motions to delay, procedural motions, et cetera, I think were almost certainly going to happen. And unfortunately, not a lot of people believed us. They got real excited that this was going to be a quick process, but history has shown us that this is just not going to be the case.
One step forward, two steps back. That's the way it's
I'm
always
not
been.
even sure that that analogy is accurate because we're kind of stepping into the unknown, and so at this point, I think it's kind of just like swimming around. I think it would have been nice to have that process move forward in a timely manner. At the same time, I do think that there is value in pointing out that the process was stacked against us from the beginning. This was something that was always assumed by anybody that has any history or experience in this. Whether or not it is helpful or potentially damaging to our cause to delay this by punting it back to the DEA, especially at a time when we don't know exactly who the next DEA administrator is going to be, I think is really kind of up in the air. We're kind of in a wait and see position here. I do think there's value in pointing out that the DEA pretty clearly had a lot of communication with people that are opposed to rescheduling and that are opposed to any changes in cannabis policy, aside from moving more towards the punitive, uh, and that is patently unfair. But I don't think that anybody who has looked at the history of the DEA would expect anything different from them. Um, but I think it's good to point that out. Now we have kind of lost the momentum of an incoming hearing. We are potentially delaying a lot of the preparations for those. A ton of people have done a ton of work in order to prepare for these, and now, are not only going to have to potentially revisit some of their arguments based on who the DEA chooses for the next round. Some of the same people might not get chosen, so all that money and resources and time that they spent preparing for it might be for nothing. Um, we might get an even worse segment of potential witnesses against rescheduling that are more full-throated, although I can't really imagine that being the case considering who they picked this time. Um, the problem is that we're just now in an unknown area, and there's no real time limit on that. So, this process could drag out even longer.
Gotcha. Do you have any thoughts about the merger of the U.S. The Cannabis Council and the National Round Table merging? Sorry about that.
Well, I think that if you're going to have a bunch of MSOs pushing for federal cannabis policy reform, it would probably be useful for them all to be rowing in the same direction and to be communicating with each other. Um, I worry that by having such a single conglomerate of well-funded business interests that they could enact or they could cause to be enacted changes that don't consider small businesses and don't necessarily consider restorative justice. But I guess it is good that everybody's on the same page. Another thing that I hope is a development from this is that these companies that are members of these coalitions, now that they're all ostensibly rolling in the same direction, are smart enough to put the vast majority of their efforts in the hands of the people that are staff workers to them, folks like Dave Mangione and David Culver. As opposed to shelling out tons of money for mercenary lobbying firms who have a vested interest in bringing them real close to the finish line, but not quite across it.
Gotcha. And I have one last thing. It's from me. Do you ever think Virginia will actually get on board with a real adult use pro program? And what are some ways that people can go and help NORML get involved?
Well, my colleague J.M. Padini, who is the executive director of Virginia NORML, is a much better person to ask about that. But
She's been
just
fantastic.
yeah,
She's been fantastic here.
but from a national perspective, I do think that Virginia is moving in the right direction. We just have to get over the hump of a couple of really problematic politicians, in particular the governor. It makes zero sense that Governor Youngkin would basically attempt to continue propping up an unregulated market and completely eschew the idea of actually regulating cannabis, despite the fact that it is legal. And so until he either has a change of heart or is removed from office, I think that we might be playing an incremental game in Virginia, but I do think that the state will get there eventually. Um, how it does and what that looks like, I think is kind of an open question, but there does seem to be a tremendous amount of consensus among advocates about what a regulated cannabis system in Virginia would look like. And so now it's just a matter of getting the politicians out of the way.
Yes, yes. And thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor here talking with you today, and I'm actually looking forward to meeting you Saturday, because that's going to be the day that I shall be there. Is there any other ways that people can go and donate to help NORML in their cause that
Absolutely.
you would like to spread?
Yeah, you can just go to normal.org/support if you'd like to find ways that you can financially support our work. I also recommend going to normal.org/act, and you can find a number of ways to track legislation as well as contact your lawmakers directly in support of that legislation, no matter what state you're in.
Well, fantastic. Morgan, thank you so much. Once again, it has been an entire honor. And that is going to do it for this special one-on-one report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, with Morgan Fox, stay lifted.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Be Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Green Finger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Debbie Fazy with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Elena Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast, PCM TV's weekly roundup of industry news from California to New York. I'm Elena Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCM TV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.